I would also like to thank Aldo for this perfect introduction into what I will talk about, since I will discuss the independent scene, and there are many similar tendencies between Croatian and Slovenian scene of the time, obviously because we were in the same country in certain periods. I think I'll stay under 30 minutes, so I'll try to compensate a bit for this stretching of the presentation. Anyway, the title of this presentation suggests the independent theater in Croatia as its main theme. However, the term needs introductory explanation. Namely, it appeared from below within the scene itself at the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century, and it is questionable whether we can apply it retrospectively. Therefore, although I generalized the title for practical reasons, the presentation will include theater practices from the second half of the 20th century, which are perhaps more accurately categorized as non-institutional, considering their financial, logistic, and aesthetic development in opposition to and outside of the network of national theatre institutions, or in rare cases on its margins. Furthermore, I will shortly discuss the contemporary independent scene, which only partially inherits the legacy of its non-institutional precedents. As both develop sporadically in major urban centers and remain under-researched, the following paper will provide major examples from the most developed and most influential Zagreb scene, while using the analysis to present creative processes, organizational principles, performance forms, and themes, which then resonate across the rest of the national scene. When it comes to the 20th century, individual cases of non-institutional performance can be found in the 1920s, while a recognizable scene develops within student theatre of the 1950s and 1960s, with important representatives of new performative trends, such as student experimental theatre. Still, I've decided to open this presentation with the 1970s, when the infrastructural base and the tendency towards theatrical experimentation, which the deteriorating student theatre left behind, was taken over by several theatrical initiatives. Rejecting the term student in favor of the youth theatre in order to describe their aesthetic choices and not merely the age of the participants, they developed into some of the most important innovative examples of the 1970s and 1980s, whose aesthetic trajectory still continues. These young artists survived in between relative independence and politically conditioned protection of rare institutions, which offered partial and inadequate support. The most important of those was Theater ITD, which means theater, etc., which was established within the student center of the University of Zagreb in the 1960s, and until today maintains the borderline position between student and professional theater, with the repertory dedicated to contemporary playwriting, exploration of performance space, multimedia, and theatrical experiment in general. The second helpful institution was the Center for Cultural Activities, which was formed by the Socialist Youth of Croatia to produce a variety of cultural activities, including theatre. In addition, some of the innovative theatre groups were initiated at the Zagreb Academy of Dramatic Art, which they also used as safe haven. A number of neo-avant-garde representatives adhering to this frame appeared in different parts of the country to explore political and activist performance, collective and environmental work, physical expression and visual emphasis, as well as fresh creative methodologies. Although we can list other significant names, such as Theater Lero from Dubrovnik or Theater Daska from Sisak, I will shortly present theatrical work or mention more of three prominent Zagreb theater groups whose fluctuating membership included mainly local university students gathered around one or several charismatic leaders. So this is the first one, Totole Moco. They intentionally took the name which confused the recipients, so that even today many people are not certain how the name should be pronounced. Is it Kokolemoc or Kokolemoc or whatever it is. But it is Tsotsolemoco, as the original members claim. So chronologically, the oldest Tsotsolemoco started performing in 1971 as a group of high school students fascinated by Brecht Leipzig. Brecht's ideas would further influence their work, especially two of the most important performances: the subversive Do Not Renounce What Isn't There from 1979 in the form of a propagandist socialist performance, and the monotone puppet morality play from contemporary life, this is that, named A Day in the Life of Ignaz Golob, which problematized the oppressive everyday reality and the passivity of the ordinary man. Their dialectical approach to the presentation of performance material, early iconoclasm, and provocative stance towards spectators who were invited to complete the performance intellectually would also determine later work of Branko Brezovic, the group's director, who would become one of the key representatives of Croatian independence scene. Here you can see three different photos. The first one is not from the performance itself. It is from a series of announcements where the figure of Ignaz Golob was actually placed in the real environment of Zagreb, and so it was announced as some sort of a metaphor for the everyday life in this particular surrounding. And this is one of the scenes from the theater performance where you can see how the scenography or the set design was devised in relation to the figures and their heads. This is another scene from the performance where you can see the skyline of the city in the background. So you can see how oppressive that life can be in relation to Ignaz Golob and his wife. Also, one of the things that is perhaps not visible is the fact that figures were very large, around 3 meters high, and the performers were actually divided into two groups. One were carriers who carried those very heavy heads. I think it was around 15 kilos. And then there was another set of performers, a choir, and two performers who provided voices for all the characters. So basically the fact that the voice of the character was taken away from that character and it was provided for somebody else sort of underlined the main theme of the performance. So to continue, the second influential thematic and formal tendency was offered by Kugla Glumište, which was active from the middle of the decade, while exploring the possibilities of living and creating within the community of equals. They devised a number of fragmentary processional performances such as Soft Ships and Summer Afternoon or What Happened to Vlasta Hršak, which were infused with the musical performance of Kugla Band. The group became famous for its performative use of public spaces, juxtaposition of the ordinary reality and dreamlike fiction, and a specific form of visual theater which, inspired by Suryo, captured its recipients like a sphere. And here you can see several performances. They actually worked, they had a very small space within the student center which they could use as like business premises, 2 rooms they could use to store certain props or to just sort of discuss the performance, but they couldn't actually rehearse there. At the very beginning of their work, they were able to use the stage of the theater ITD. However, they very quickly lost that stage. And also, as the outcome of those unfavorable circumstances, they sort of stepped out of the closed spaces, and then they continued performing almost exclusively in public spaces. But obviously, I mean, they were very good at using that space and developing their aesthetics. So this is one of the performances which was staged in one of the oldest parts of Zagreb, Trnje, like a working class neighborhood, very poor, and these other 2 were staged in different parks in Zagreb. This is Maksimir and this is Park Stara Trešnjevka. Yeah, but So it was a true environmental aesthetics that they actually devised performances for the specific environment. And they were rather popular on the independent scene of the whole, then a much larger country. So even when they traveled with the performance, somewhere, for example, soft ships were awarded, I think in Bitev in Belgrade. So when they traveled, they sort of built the performance anew from the new surrounding. They chose surrounding that would be similar, that would communicate a similar message, so to speak, in well, say, in a completely new city. And then they performed it like this. So they did not. They tried not to destroy the performance by completely changing by completely changing the set, rather create a new one, so to speak. So, however, to go to the last example, perhaps the most famous of the three examples was a theater workshop Pozdravi, which was founded at the Academy of Drama Arts by the students and the teacher of the stage movement class. As one of the early non-institutional organizations of professional artists, the group explored the possibilities of actors' physical and verbal expression, improvisation, collective creation, and interaction with the audience. Thus, they successfully opposed then dominant text-based logocentric director's theater, creating stage successes such as The Return of the Arlecchino, Play Držić, and Pozdravi, which also provided the name for the group. So this is the performance from the photo from their most successful performance. Pozdravi, which was based on the text, very short text by Eugenio Nescu, which in fact has only 3 pages, and the performance was an hour long, so it was mostly devised by the actors themselves. And these are 2 other performances. This last one, the last photo presents actually the workshop that they did for a different performance, Play Držić, which they produced for a kind of an off festival that was that existed parallel to one of the most important theater festivals in Yugoslavia of the time, Dubrovnik Summer Festival. So it was part of the youth theater festival that was for a couple of years connected to Dubrovnik summer festivals, and but it was very important. I mean, it was like part of the official program, important enough that the performance by Kugla Glumište, which I didn't show because I didn't have the photo of that specific performance, summer afternoon, or what happened to Vlasta Hršak, was actually awarded by the main, actually got the main award of the festival, Orlando Award, and that was like a big scandal because amateurs were given like the most important prize, a theater prize in the country, etc. So to continue and to go to the next period, the theatrical explosion on the alternative scene slowly died away in the second part of the 1980s, with some of the established young artists, such as the members of the various fractions of Kugla Glumište, continuing their intriguing artistic practice, while others, who would evolve in the forthcoming period, such as the group Dr. Inat from Pula, or theater group Pinklets from Čakovec, appeared with their initial works. The next decade, however, would bring another set of circumstances which proved essential for creating a more permanent non-institutional scene. The most relevant one was Croatian War of Independence in the first half of the 1990s, which was quickly followed by the separation into a smaller state, ideological turn towards the right, and a decisive transition to capitalism. In spite of the increased opportunities for the new generation of young playwrights and theater directors who would emerge to introduce new conceptual and stylistic frames, a strong propagandist and conservative trend in the institutional theater submitted to the promotion of traditionalism and national culture as key segments of public culture, thus participating in the ideological formation and reinforcement of the new state. At the same time, a new wave of non-institutional theater was slowly emerging in the country as a series of scattered individual initiatives, attempts, and actors who only occasionally collaborated. The new scene, which was rather aesthetically, thematically, and organizationally diverse, promoted different artistic interests, such as aggressive physical theater, for example, of Monterstroj, theatricalization of fashion, for example, of Ivana Popović's projects, hermetic ritual performance by Damir Bartolindoš, or activist reshaping of everyday reality by Boris Bakal. Of those, I chose to present a specific performative phenomenon which appeared in Zagreb at the turn of the millennia, the mostly new youth scene composed of various individuals, performance duos, and groups, which produced several dozen projects and shaped some of the most intriguing contemporary Croatian theater artists, such as Marina Petković-Liker, Anica Tomić, and Jelena Kovačić, or Oliver Frljić. The scene was, in a way, self-sown, since its participants entered the world of performance arts outside of the cultural frame, which they considered an unnecessary administrative and semantical burden. They often started the work spontaneously, which is sometimes indicated by the non-programmatic naming of the group. For example, this is one. Theatre de Femme was composed of female members only, whereas the name Dakle Lososi, or therefore Salmon, was picked randomly from a book on the nearby shelf. Most of the participants perceived performance as a simple means of expressing their own ideas and feelings, for example, feminist ones, and not revising the official history of art. So they produced no joint declarations or manifestos, had no acknowledged leaders, and determined no field of activity in advance. If anything, the scene was polyphonic and mostly young, so groups were renewed through generational relations or regrouped and dispersed as the dynamics of their lives, for example, the period of university education, changed. Their amateur work was sometimes accompanied by strong criticism of theatrical institutions, which they perceived as conservative. Perhaps the best example is this one. The action Out Demons Out, performed by Smrtstheater, or Smrtstheater, when they applied different techniques such as throwing eggs or juggling to Croatian National Theatre in Zagreb. So they're aligned across from the building of the National Theatre, while trying to exorcise demons from the building. Still, most of the actors did not derive their performative identity from their perception of the institutional or mainstream theater, or even heritage of alternative performance. Instead, they turned towards each other and their own interests, recognizing similarities, while the shortage of professional education, experience, or fully developed aesthetics quite naturally resulted in their non-institutional status. I should also emphasize the often present flexible division of artistic responsibility within numerous non-hierarchized collectives, as well as the shifting nature of the scene where new groups sprung from the old, individuals transferred from one collective to another, or created new formations on a daily basis. Joining forces to create a single work of art was, as usual, as a multi-year activity, and most of the young authors nurtured inclusive approach to building a performance where each of the participants chose their own way to contribute. That inspired using the existing skills as potential artistic skills and devising new creative procedures. Such working conditions obviously influenced their aesthetics and choice of genre. So in addition to text-based and devised performances, many authors selected performance art and happening to achieve quick reaction and immediate communication. You can see one of the examples here. It's not the performance that I'll mention, but it is the same group. The use of real space and the reality of recipients' presence in performance art was also very inspiring to this homeless scene. For example, the group Le Cheval announced their provocative performance, The Battle of Kosovo, which was named after a famous medieval battle between Serbian army and the army of the Ottoman Empire, on the day NATO attacked Yugoslavia, then Yugoslavia, in 1999. The performance was placed in front of the then embassy of Yugoslavia in Zagreb, but the ones who appeared and performed, so the only ones who appeared and performed, were the audience and the police, who dutifully performed a quick check. So, which is why I chose this photo, because you can see one of the prominent members of the group on the left, Oliver Frljić, who actually uses the same kind of provocation nowadays and the same kind of, I would say, historical parallels in his theatrical work that he used to do as a student in his, performance art. Well, not just his, but the collective performance art, you could say. So the final characteristic of the scene was its short life. Although it founded several of its own manifestations, such as festivals Faki and Test, Theater to Students, it did not succeed in transforming a spontaneous performative phenomena into a permanent off-scene, and thus it naturally dispersed and disappeared over a period of several years. Since the beginning of the new millennium, once fragmented field of Croatian independent culture has managed to ensure better, although not adequate, legal and financial support. In accordance, contemporary theatrical independent scene became increasingly abundant, but also organized, professionalized, and categorized. This is primarily evident in its name, as the independent attempt to emancipate from the institutional criteria and ensure parameters for establishing their own institutions. Furthermore, the tendency towards a system becomes visible on the organizational level, where the scene formalizes its activity mostly through a number of NGOs. For example, there are more than 200 such artistic organizations of the civil sectors nowadays, according to the official theater register. When it comes to financial and infrastructural support, the circumstances have slightly improved. For example, programs such as support for the organizational development by the Foundation Cultura Nova provides a part of that institutional privilege for the period of maximum 3 years to the artists on the independent scene, whereas the call for the assignation of public business premises for the NGOs by the city of Zagreb provides them with the office space. However, the scene mostly relies on project finances while holding precarious jobs and lacking performance spaces, which reduces visibility, aggravates attendance, endangers the continuity of work, and results in drastic waste of human and financial resources. Kunsttheater, and you can see the entrance of the theater in these two photos. So one is through a bar. The entrance to the theater is door on the left, which you cannot see, and this is the back entrance, just like a plain door on an empty wall. So Kunsttheater is one of rare theaters which progresses in defiance of the described working circumstances, as it is dedicated exclusively to the presentation of contemporary independent performance and partially inherits the approach, the aesthetics, and the audience of the existing venues, such as Exit Theater or Theater ITD. Although it was founded at the end of 2018 in the adapted space of a former gym, which can host barely 50 spectators, Kunst has successfully survived the crisis during the pandemic lockdown. Until today, the theater has produced a number of their own performances, mostly authors' projects of younger artists, and it has established a repertoire continuity, developed its own audience, who regularly fill the small auditorium, and has built the image of a venue with the competitive theatrical program. Although the founders avoid defining a strict and limiting aesthetic frame of this theater, it noticeably avoids ready-made solutions and turns toward methodological, performative, textual, or other research. But it also admits the influence of unfavorable conditions, which are reflected in the poverty of the stage, the dominance of the performer, or even development of the specific trash aesthetics. I chose just a number of photos from their current repertoire and so that you can see sort of the continuity, even sometimes in the use, in the use of prop or set, or very often new media instead of set design, because this is what they can actually afford. And I'm very sorry that Dino Pešut is not going to be live here, so that he can perhaps adapt his presentation to this, because one of the directors that he chose to talk about, from what I read from the summary, Ivan Penović has directed a number of performances in this theater particularly. Okay, this is the last. No, it doesn't really matter. So this last example leads to the issue of aesthetic autonomy of contemporary independent theater scene, which will also serve as the conclusion of this presentation. As noted by the cultural manager Deja Vidović, in the 1990s, independent artists develop inclusivity, critical approach to social reality, formal and methodological diversity, awareness of international cultural trends, and interaction with other fields of social activity through initiatives from below, and thus establish preconditions for artistic innovations. In the third decade of the 21st century, however, those same characteristics become essential components of general cultural policies and strategies of cultural development. Even more so, they occasionally turn into institutional demands, reflecting both the acceptance and the systematization of the scene. Also, regardless of the terminological correctness, difference and novelty on the independent scene are still often estimated in relation to the petrified image of the theater institution, and not in relation to other participants of the same scene or previous work of individual artists, which makes both values rather questionable. Finally, the contemporary scene equally includes those who are organizationally and financially independent, but rather traditional or even old-fashioned in their programs, those who choose to indulge rather than challenge their audiences, and those who aim towards financial and non-aesthetic profit, and not aesthetic profit. Thus, we could perhaps introduce the difference between the initial movement and the scene which developed in time, and nowadays certainly represents a new production level, but not always a new aesthetic choice.